General Hospital spoilers reveal that Drew's crimes are gradually being exposed like a cracked map, unveiling a meticulously planned manipulation campaign carried out with chilling coldness. Initially, everyone believed that Drew returned from his dark days with the mindset of a reborn man, carrying righteous ideals and a desire to do what's right. But as time passed, his actions made it clear that the opposite was true. Drew didn't return to fix mistakes, but to reshape the order according to his own will, regardless of the consequences and the destruction of relationships around him. In his mind, the truth was simply a material to be bent to suit his needs for power and control. The story of Drew splitting Michael and Willow wasn't just a series of petty acts, but a long-term, deliberate campaign, carefully calculated with cunning precision. While Michael was held in Germany, far away from everything, it was Drew who stood at the center of the web of information and manipulation. Paying a nurse to lie to Willow that Michael had refused to meet her wasn't just a ruthless act of deception, it was a direct stab at trust. At the fragile connection Michael and Willow had tried to preserve through countless hardships. One lie, one cold arrangement, turned Michael from a loving husband into an indifferent figure in Willow's eyes, and that was enough to bring everything crashing down. Drew didn't stop there. When Willow was hurt and vulnerable, he didn't present himself as a neutral friend. Instead, he exploited that emotional gap to step in, slowly building a new relationship based on pity, loss, and assumptions. Drew made Willow believe that Michael had abandoned her, that the past needed to be buried, and that all she needed now was a man who understood her and would protect her. He deliberately crafted an image of himself in that role. This wasn't pure affection. It was psychological manipulation on a sophisticated level, targeting someone's unhealed wounds for personal gain. The change Drew brought to Port Charles was a complete distortion. Relationships once built on love, forgiveness, and trust were now twisted by lies woven carefully like traps. Michael, once seen as a stable pillar, was turned into an unreliable father, a detached husband. Willow, once the embodiment of compassion, was now dragged into a mire of doubt and betrayal. Even Jason, who never intended harm, was drawn into the psychological game between Sasha and Michael, blurring the lines between right and wrong, eroding trust bit by bit. The most terrifying thing wasn't just what Drew did, but how he did it all with a completely harmless facade. He didn't shout, didn't openly fight, but instead, step by step, pushed people out of their rightful places in each other's lives. Every fake piece of advice, every support laced with hidden meanings, every action that appeared to be for the common good, was all part of the machine that Drew was using to manipulate the truth with ruthless precision. Port Charles wasn't just witnessing a custody battle, it was a fight for control over emotions, memories, and trust of an entire generation. One of the things that made the situation even darker was that no one could truly see the full picture until it was too late. Drew had planted seeds of doubt in every key figure, from Willow to Sasha, to Diane, making those who once stood by Michael uncertain. The structure of relationships that Michael and Willow had worked so hard to protect, from sleepless nights caring for Wiley to sacrifices made in the face of illness, was now being blurred under the dust of well-constructed lies. And this led to an obsession growing day by day, not just with Michael, but with everyone who had ever trusted Drew. The feeling of being betrayed by someone once considered the most trustworthy ally had left Michael doubting everything. He hadn't just lost Willow. He felt he had lost the moral foundation he once believed in, because when a liar cloaks himself in righteousness, who can still believe in what's right? That obsession was changing Michael. From a calm man, he had become someone who no longer believed in leniency. And if Drew thought he could continue manipulating without facing consequences, then Michael, with the smoldering anger like a fire beneath the ashes, would be the first to ignite everything into a blaze of justice. Port Charles was changing. And while everyone was still unclear about the wave of overwhelming events, one thing was certain: Drew's crimes would not remain hidden forever. And when the truth exploded, no one, not even Willow, could escape the aftershock. For what was stolen wasn't just love or trust, it was an entire definition of justice, ethics, and truth that had once existed here. Michael's victory in the custody battle for Wiley and Amelia wasn't just a personal win in the courtroom, but a major turning point that was reshaping the power balance within the Corinthos Quartermain family. After months of being cornered, deceived, and excluded from crucial decisions concerning his children, Michael had finally reclaimed what he believed was rightfully his, the right to be a father fully, untainted by the manipulations of anyone, especially Drew. But while Michael left the courtroom with a resounding victory, Drew faced an inevitable series of consequences, no place left to hide. Not even within the very family he once thought he would always control. ELQ, the symbol of power, legacy, and the bloodline of the Quartermains, had once been the battlefield where Drew clung to his image as a trustworthy heir and a competent businessman. But everything he had done, from manipulating Willow, splitting Michael apart, hiding the truth about Sasha, to destroying basic moral principles, had caused everything to crumble like a sandcastle swept away by the tide of truth. In the most recent shareholders' meeting, Drew not only faced confrontation but was completely isolated. Those who once trusted him now turned their backs, votes of power gradually slipped from his hands, and his dream of leading ELQ evaporated like foam. No longer in a leadership position, no longer a voice in decision-making, Drew was now an outsider in the very home he had once used underhanded tactics to assert his power. The madness was in the fact that all of this could have been avoided, if Drew hadn't been obsessed with controlling everything. He didn't just want Willow. He wanted to warp reality, erase Michael from her mind, and replace him with himself. But in doing so, Drew had lost the most important thing, trust. Trust from Willow, from ELQ members, and worst of all, from himself, because now, he had no moral justification for what he had done. Drew's downfall is a textbook lesson on how a false champion of justice will ultimately be exposed by the very justice they tried to manipulate. Michael, in contrast, was slowly regaining his image as a devoted father, a man who stood up for his children, and a true voice in the legacy left by Monica. The custody battle didn't just return the two children to where they belonged, it was Michael's assertion to all of Port Charles that he was no longer the easily manipulated guy he once was. No longer blinded by the sweet words of schemers like Drew. He was ready to fight, and fight to the end, to protect what he loved. Meanwhile, Drew was living in the aftermath of his wrong choices. He was ousted from ELQ, lost his influence over Willow, saw his allies turn away, and now faced the scorn of the very people he had once manipulated. Every lie, every strategic move he made had become evidence against him, and the harshest thing was, no one wanted to listen to his justifications anymore. Drew had officially become a ghost in the world he once controlled. This story proves one of the craziest shifts in the history of powerful families in Port Charles. Drew, once expected to be the promising heir, was now removed from the chessboard, while Michael, the man once placed in a vulnerable position, emerged as the new pillar of the family. And the obsession was no longer just in the past. It was becoming a reality where the price would be unavoidable, and Drew would have to face the mistakes he once disregarded. Everything had gone too far. And now, Port Charles could only wait and see, would Drew continue to fall, or would he desperately struggle in the darkness of his own making? Tracy, Michael, and Jason have had enough. They have waited long enough, observed enough, and kept silent while everything around them gradually collapsed due to Drew's schemes and manipulation. But now, as the darkest secrets begin to surface, as the consequences of Drew's actions go beyond just tearing Michael and Willow apart, and begin to shake the very foundations of the Quartermain family and threaten the stability of ELQ, these three have no choice but to act. And when Tracy, Michael, and Jason decide to join forces, it's no longer a knee-jerk reaction, it's an official declaration of a full-scale, strategic, organized war with a clear objective, to permanently end Drew's power and influence in Port Charles. Tracy was the first to recognize the danger posed by Drew, but she kept silent, thinking she could control the situation. However, witnessing Drew continually overstep, interfering in family decisions, breaking moral boundaries, and using lies to manipulate Willow's emotions, she realized this was no longer a business battle, it was an ethical war, a conflict between right and wrong. Tracy began investigating Drew's suspicious activities in Germany, where he had paid a nurse to lie to Willow, telling her Michael had refused to meet with her. She also quietly dug through ELQ's financial transactions, uncovering shady payments related to the manipulation of Heather Weber's medical records. When she laid all the evidence before Michael and Jason, an alliance against Drew was officially formed. Meanwhile, Michael had been dragged into the eye of the storm created by Drew, from the custody battle over Wiley and Amelia to the shock of discovering that Sasha was pregnant with his child but had been forced to lie and say Jason was the father. Drew didn't just make Michael lose trust in his family, he completely destroyed the relationship between Michael and Willow. Drew's lies were like a sweet dagger, slowly sinking into Michael's heart, unbeknownst to him, until the truth was exposed. Now, Michael was no longer the calm, conflict-avoidant son, he was becoming a warrior, ready to protect his right to be a father, his honor, and the children he loved more than anything. He was ready to confront anyone, even Willow, if necessary, and Drew, with all his guilt, would have to pay. Jason, with his quiet demeanor but always acting at the right moment, became the decisive card in this alliance. He never forgave betrayal, especially when it involved the people he loved. Jason had kept silent when Sasha asked for his help to conceal the secret about the child. But when he learned that this was all part of Drew's strategy to push Michael out of the custody battle, he could no longer stay on the sidelines. He began gathering information on Drew's dealings, verifying every rumor, every piece of evidence, and now, Jason had enough to tear apart Drew's false moral facade. Together, this trio was creating an unprecedented strong front. Tracy used her influence within ELQ to prepare for a vote to remove Drew from the board. Michael was working closely with Diane Miller to present Drew's manipulations in court records. And Jason, always working behind the scenes, was ready to strike if anyone dared to obstruct justice. No one in Port Charles could ignore the tide of retaliation now, and Drew was backed into a corner. Those who had once been neutral were now forced to pick sides, and most were leaning toward Tracy, Michael, and Jason. What was terrifying here was that Drew wasn't just losing power. He was losing trust, the very thing that kept him viable in relationships in Port Charles. Willow, too, was beginning to doubt what she had believed to be the truth. Carly, who had once defended Drew, had now turned her back. Sasha was completely broken when she realized she had been used as a pawn to take down Michael. And while Drew tried to maintain his calm demeanor, his internal world was falling apart piece by piece as he realized he had lost more than he had ever imagined. The new troubles were no longer a threat, they were happening, escalating hour by hour. And Drew, who had once manipulated everything from the shadows, was now standing precariously on the edge of total collapse. This was the price he had to pay for daring to disregard morality, for using emotions as a tool, and for challenging those who understood what fairness and loyalty truly meant. Port Charles would have no room left for people like him. And when the storm he had created swept through, Drew could only watch as everything crumbled, alone. Drew Kane would have nowhere left to run. The crimes he had once evaded, concealed with a veneer of righteousness and humanitarian arguments, were now being exposed under the harsh light of justice. No longer just rumors in hospital hallways or suspicion from those close to him, now everything was in Jason's hands, every document, every recording, every testimony from nurses, doctors, and those Drew had once manipulated, threatened, or bribed to serve his personal agenda. And in an upcoming hearing, where all of Port Charles would be watching, Drew would be forced to face the most severe consequences, being convicted, imprisoned, and possibly losing everything, his power, his reputation, his freedom, and the precious relationships he once had. Drew's greatest crime wasn't just the fraud, it was the betrayal. He betrayed Michael, who had once seen him as a brother. He fabricated the lie about Michael refusing to meet Willow in Germany, causing her to completely break down and fall into his arms, an arrangement coldly calculated and manipulative. He also colluded with Sasha and Jason to conceal the true identity of the father of Sasha's child, turning an innocent child into a strategic pawn in the legal battle for custody of Wiley and Amelia. There were no words strong enough to describe the cruelty of this act, where Drew had turned love, motherhood, and trust into mere pieces on his power chessboard. And then, the price he would have to pay was not just imprisonment, but the complete collapse from the inside out. ELQ, where he had once been a key shareholder, was holding an emergency meeting to discuss revoking his shares, removing him from the board, and sealing all his personal accounts related to the company's funds. Tracy now had enough power to make this happen, and this time, no one would be able to protect Drew. Jason, who had saved him countless times, had kept silent. Carly had turned her back coldly. Michael, after everything he had endured, no longer cared to maintain any sense of loyalty. And worst of all, Willow, the only person who had trusted and stood by Drew all along, was now beginning to see the truth. Willow was now trapped in a maze with no way out. She had placed all her trust in Drew, seeing him as the one person who understood her best, the only one who listened and protected her during her darkest days. But when the evidence of Drew's lies about Michael refusing to meet her in Germany was exposed, Willow felt as though her dream had been torn apart. She was no longer seen as a victim, but as a blinded woman who had aided a fraudster in hurting the father of her children. She faced the doubtful eyes of the judge, of the community, even of her own son, Wiley, who, when he grew up, would know the truth. Drew had left behind a fractured legacy, a destroyed Quartermain family, a divided ELQ, a Port Charles filled with rifts. And Willow completely alone in the very choice she once believed to be right. This was one of the greatest tragedies, when crime not only imprisons the perpetrator, but drags innocent souls into the dark abyss. Willow no longer had a way back. She had gone too far, trusted too deeply, and now she was paying the price with her own dignity and her right to be a mother. Meanwhile, Michael was ready to end everything, with Carly and Jason standing by his side. He was no longer the man pushed into a passive position. He would take back Wiley and Amelia. He would clarify that he was the father of Sasha's child. He would stand in court, not as a victim, but as a deserving father, a son of the Corinthos family, strong, just, and resilient. And if necessary, he was ready to watch Drew be handcuffed and escorted out of the courthouse, because a father must protect what is his. And with everything unfolding, no one doubted that anymore. Drew would go to prison. Willow would lose custody. Michael would win. But the cost of that victory was not small. It was a lasting crack between those who once loved each other. A never-fading warning about the consequences of betrayal, and a new era for Port Charles, where justice could no longer be manipulated, and the truth would always be revealed. Willow had once been the symbol of patience, unconditional love, and forgiveness. She had endured unimaginable pain in her life, from losing her biological son, to accepting Wiley as her own child. And later, fighting cancer without uttering a single complaint. But what no one truly saw was that, step by step in that journey, Michael was always there, not just as a partner, but as the one who brought her peace in a world full of chaos. Now, as everything crumbles due to a series of lies fabricated by the person she had once trusted completely, Willow starts to feel the empty space Michael left within her. It was no longer just the absence of a husband, but the loss of herself, of where she once belonged. What Drew had done had not only torn a family apart but also suffocated Willow's ability to love and trust. By creating the story that Michael had refused to meet her in Germany, Drew had killed the last hope Willow had clung to during the hardest time of her life. She believed that Michael had turned his back on her when she needed him most. And that didn't just break her heart, it made her convince herself that every door between them had closed. So, when Drew extended his arms, offering her a sense of protection, Willow fell into his embrace, not out of love, but out of desperation. She found in Drew a safe substitute, but deep inside, the flame of love for Michael had never gone out. Now, as the truth slowly comes to light, Willow has no reason to continue living in deception. She must face the reality that she had placed her trust in the wrong person. That she had inadvertently pushed Michael further away when he needed her the most. Michael's return was not just a legal turning point in the custody battle, it was an emotional storm that swept away everything she had tried to hide in her heart. When she saw Michael holding Wiley, laughing with Amelia, gently resting his hand on Sasha's belly, who was carrying his child, Willow clearly felt one thing: she had once had all those moments. And she had lost them not because Michael had changed, but because she had stepped back before fighting to the end. But her desire to return was not driven by jealousy. It came from awakening after a string of mistakes. Willow knew that no one could erase what had happened. She had hurt Michael, and he too had made decisions that made her suffer. But between them still remained something unnameable, a bond that no time, no lie could erase. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, she was asking for a chance to prove that she was still the woman Michael once trusted. The one who had fought alongside him against everything, from family opposition to the unbearable pain of loss. Willow feared that when she spoke up, it might be too late. She knew Sasha, with her gentleness and loyalty, deserved a fresh start with Michael. She also knew that Carly, who always protected her son like a lioness, would not easily forgive her sudden return. But for the first time in months, Willow didn't care about the consequences. She only knew that if she didn't step forward and speak the truth from her heart, she would regret it for the rest of her life. She couldn't bear the thought of watching Michael move on without ever knowing that there was still someone silently loving him, a person who had been wrong, but had never stopped loving. She wrote a letter. In it, she didn't make excuses or assign blame. She only shared her true feelings. Each small memory between them, from mornings spent making coffee together to rocking Amelia to sleep. She said that if Michael had moved on and chosen a new life, she would respect that. But if there was even a tiny part of him that hadn't closed the door on the past, she was ready to start over, not as a married couple, but as two people learning how to trust and love again from the beginning. That letter, if it reached Michael, would open a new chapter, not just for Willow, but for all of Port Charles. And whether that chapter would be one of forgiveness, reunion, or final tears and separation, only time would tell. But at least Willow had chosen love over silence. And sometimes, that's all a broken heart needs to start healing. The end of Drew was not just the end of a character who had once been trusted, but the beginning of a series of structural changes in the entire storyline of General Hospital. As Drew is accused and gradually loses power, reputation, and even freedom, a power vacuum begins to form at the heart of the most influential families in Port Charles. This vacuum is not merely a loss, it becomes a tempting bait for those lurking in the shadows, with dark plots never before revealed, but now ready to rise. Drew's fall has awakened other hostile forces, who have long been watching and calculating. They understand that when a fortress is breached, it's the ideal time to launch the final strikes, whether it's aimed at ELQ, the Quartermain family, or even the entire legal and medical systems of Port Charles. Drew's demise doesn't close the door on schemes, but rather opens wide the gates of hell that many will never expect. Jason, Tracy, Michael, or even Carly will have to face a more complex front, where loyalty is tested and the secrets in the shadows slowly come to light. No one will be able to stand outside of this whirlwind. And with Drew removed from the board, the power game is reset once more dangerous, more ambitious, and without room for mistakes. The new plots won't just be about money or fame, they will be about revenge, manipulation, and long-buried secrets that seemed forgotten. This is the phase General Hospital is entering, the darkest era, where no one is innocent, and anyone can become a pawn if they don't act in time.